So I was browsing financial news, FinTwit, all that, and I came across this chart. It looks like you got a little bit of an issue developing in uh, Europe as far as bankruptcies are concerned. It's pretty amazing. I was trying to find one. I was trying to find a chart that goes back, prior to 2008, so I can compare what's happening now to what was going on in 2008. And I also don't know why this line is going straight up. Do we have the Q4 data yet? I'm not sure. But the bankruptcies are on the rise. I found this chart when I was trying to find a chart going back to 2008. And this chart looks a little different, so I don't know what the deal is there. They both say they're seasonally adjusted. They both proclaim to be the same data. Here, it looks more like we don't have Q4's data yet. They haven't plotted to end of Q4 2022 yet. So maybe here they're just drawing this line up even though they don't have the data yet. I don't know. I don't know what this is about. So I'm gonna go with this chart because this is from Europa.eu, so it's euro to the core. And here we see bankruptcies are on the rise. This is just another reminder. Be careful with charts you see on Twitter because something weird, something funny is going on with this chart. Maybe they just decided, oh, well, we haven't got Q4 yet, but we're just going to draw the line straight up anyway. Or maybe it's the EU trying to make things look better than they actually are. Either way, who knows? But this is the thing, is you can't expect, people to feed you the truth. You have to actually work yourself to come to the truth. And I think, just to go on a little tangent here, uh, the boomers and the Gen Xers, uh, they've lived through the last several decades, and they've had what they thought was the truth fed to them through mass media. And they've been ingrained to come to accept what they got out of the mass media as fact, what they got from the bureaucracies as fact. And hopefully that's changing with the younger generations. But that's why these older generations keep getting duped and will continue to get duped because they're too insecure to admit that they're getting duped in the first place. That's my little tangent. But so bankruptcies are on the rise. Inflation went up like crazy in Europe again, and not because of increased business activity, right? I doubt it's because of increased business activity. So you have a stagflation, or a inflationary recession uh, uh, situation that we can say with some certainty at this point is materializing in Europe. The United States can, you know, fortify itself against that, but I think it will affect the United. It will be a headwind on the United States economy as well. Just because the United States has, if anything, over the last few years, gotten closer and more integrated with Europe. So, but I wanted to go. Then I went to. So this is 110,000 was what they had in 2015. When was this released? I wonder. I don't know when this was released. Eurostat. Okay, so and then I looked up this. Oh fuck. Did I do it? Okay, no, I didn't accidentally delete it. Okay, so here we have a I guess the best I can find, it's from an official source, Bureau of Labor Statistics. I mean, after that last jobs report and how wonky their numbers have been, especially that jobs report, the establishment survey, yeah, you got to take you should take what the BLS says with not a lot of salt, just a little pinch of salt, okay? Uh, but they have they tabulate private sector establishment births and deaths seasonally adjusted, and here we have basically it's telling you when they say deaths, that is the bankruptcies or business closings. I think it's just business closings. So you see that in June Q2 of 2020 during the COVID, it jumped up to 4% from a median of 2.8 or so percent. Went up to 4%. So about a little more than a percent increase. I'm not sure where they got this number. 30% of all businesses, small businesses, closed. I don't know if that's something you can clearly tabulate. That sounds like a little bit of extrapolation, but we see that bankruptcies went up quite a bit. These establishments that were born at that time, I bet you a lot of them were PPP loan grifting types of businesses. I just heard a figure today that there was something like 30 billion nationwide, basically stolen out of the PPP program. I mean, I knew that. I think even people who were in favor of the program would have acknowledged there was going to be a lot of fraud. Anything haphazardly put together like that, it's going to be subject to fraud. There's just not, it's just because the government can't do anything on the fly. All right, so we see that there was a lot of business failures, and then I guess I was reading this paper from the Fed. And they're saying that the only really reliable or really official statistics you get are the census data and the BLS data. So what I wanted to talk about was what the destruction of small business really does, how it affects our human rights as sovereign individuals who value our liberty, our freedom, our property. What this does, what this does is this takes all of the what it's doing, as we can see from wealth inequality numbers and all that. What's happening is wealth and thus the means of production are being consolidated into a smaller and smaller group of people, which that group of people, those various disparate groups that tacitly agree with each other at times, and sometimes their interests are congruent. They're not a single, WEF type of group. WEF is just some fringe old money group that they're kind of a bunch of clowns, and I think they've gotten a little bit more attention than they deserve, but they have wreaked havoc in some countries, like in the Netherlands. But this wealth inequality basically translates into the means of production being concentrated into the hands of a small hodgepodge group that I call the power structure. This group consisting of, bureaucrats, politicians, oligarchs, technocrats, old money, and organized crime. That's the power structure. That's what really essentially where these various estates are the ones that rule over us. And that's the means of production. In other words, that's the means. And if the people have no property in the first place, then they can't challenge the power structure when the power structure decides to enforce some capricious edict or abuse the populace somehow. In other words, property is means. Property is means. Now, when Marx talked about the people taking the means of production, he didn't mean he didn't mean take the means of production and put it under the management of a bureaucratic state, which would then become the new oligarchs. He didn't say that. He actually believed in private property. He just called it personal property, and he confused capitalism with corporatism. And I think the reason for that is because he complained a lot about it in his letters, how he wasn't making enough money to support himself, and he was bitter because he hadn't sold enough. He hadn't become a popular author, and he felt rather indignant. And even though he had some correct criticisms on corporatism or mercantilism, he incorrectly attributed capitalism to basically corporatism. That's my I'm not a philosopher, and I'm not going to try to be. That's just my outlook on it. He fails to recognize that without private property, without your own property, your own land, your own money, your own means, then you don't have the ability to act. You can't act. You can't oppose the state. You can't oppose your next door neighbor. You wouldn't have a next door neighbor if you didn't have property. But you can't oppose anybody. You can't stand in opposition to anything when you have nothing. See, Marx's idea was that the people took the means of production back from what he called capitalists. I'll call them oligarchs, or whatever noble estates existed at that time. Whatever at that time you still had the remnants of feudalism. The Habsburgs were still there and all that, but he understood that the property was the means. He called it the means of production, and without those, and the people had to take those means of production back, otherwise they would be exploited. So I don't know. I just see some inconsistencies there on his end. I'm sure there's some on my end too. But the fact of the matter is if you have nothing, it doesn't matter what freedoms you have on paper. I mean, we have freedom of speech on paper in the United States. Well, they almost completely abolished that during COVID. They were getting close. We were sliding into totalitarianism. So you have to have weapons to stand in opposition to the state. You have to have land to stand in opposition to the state. You have to have money to hire lawyers so you can go to court as the federal government drags out the case for 10 years or whatever. You have to have means. And so it doesn't matter what's on paper if no one has any property. It can say in the First Amendment all at once that you have privacy rights, except that if you have no means to challenge, any specific infringement of those rights, then those rights are null and void. And so I see a pattern here. I see a pattern developing of small businesses being targeted, maybe just because they're the low-hanging fruit. Not out of any conspiratorial, maniacal, mustache-twirling conspiracy. No. But small businesses tend to be targeted with new tax hikes. The IRS goes after them more than they go after the bigger firms. Well, they're more successful at, getting what they want out of small businesses than they are out of bigger firms. The COVID restrictions. The COVID restrictions did, as far as I know, disproportionately affect small businesses. Small businesses across the country were shut down. A food store, a small food store, would have been shut down during the COVID pandemic, and it could have been right next to a big chain grocery store that would have been bustling at the same time, and the police would have come to the small business and they would have shut down the small produce store or whatever. I heard a number that 30% of businesses went out of small businesses went out of business. I heard that number's been repeated ad nauseum, so there must be something to it. I don't know if it's taken out of context or what, but I wouldn't be surprised. And then here we have Europe, and again, it looks like I'm willing to bet that the small businesses are going to take the brunt of the recession. The big businesses will get bailed out, the really big ones. In Europe, a lot of the larger businesses, whether they're utility companies or retailers, they'll be bailed out. And our whole system seems to be so flawed that it really is it's counterproductive for small businesses. I don't know if counterproductive is the right word, but it unfairly and unreasonably burdens small businesses over big businesses. The regulations that the federal government and the state governments, for the most part, that they end up putting into law, are by and large written by the large firms, the mega corporations. The lobbyists literally write the bills. They write the sections of the bills and give them to the congressman, and the congressman just stuff that piece of paper in the larger bill. And that's why we have these 1,000-page, 5,000. I think there's some of these like tens of thousands of pages. Some of these pieces of legislation. It's basically a bunch of lobbyists running up to politicians with pieces of paper, and the politician takes all the pieces of paper and stuffs it into the larger bill. They write the laws. They write the regulations. The AT&Ts, the Walmarts, the Amazons, the Googles, they write the regulations. That's why they're constantly asking for more regulations. Like, they go in front of Congress and they say we need more regulation. Well, that's of course they want more regulation. They're the ones writing the regulations. Now, how do you think that is going to tend to work out for their smaller competitors when your large competitor is writing the rules of the game? It's not going to make it easy for a small business. So, small businesses are taxed they have a higher tax burden, as a proportion of their revenue that they bring in. It's a much larger chunk of their revenue they pay in taxes. They get harassed by the IRS much more. I'm repeating myself, but you get the picture. So now it seems like we're going down this road, bringing this all together, where you have small businesses taking the brunt of the heat every time an economic crisis comes around. You have, the government literally forcing small businesses to shut down while their counterpart next door to them, the Walmart or the Publix grocery store, they get to stay open, but the mom and pop produce stand, I've seen that literally, where the produce stand right across the street here in Florida in the beginning, it was run by people who might have been a little bit neurotic and about the whole COVID thing too, but they were closed down. It's right across the street from a Publix, and the produce stand was closed down. So it's just, I think the reason that is obviously it's not going to be a concerted effort because the government isn't competent enough to actually decide to destroy small businesses and then execute that plan. The government has no competence for that, but they are the low-hanging fruit. So whenever there's they can say, well, let's pass new regulations. Here comes the large businesses. They write the regulations. It makes it harder for the small. Oh, we need to raise taxes on the rich. That's a good one. So whenever they whenever they say they want to raise taxes on the rich, they don't actually mean they're going to raise taxes on the rich. The top 1%, their taxes hasn't gone up in I don't know how long, and it's not going up anytime soon. When they say the rich, they mean the successful small businesses, someone who might have a net worth of like $10 million, $5 million. I mean, if you put all of his assets together, all of his properties, okay, someone like that, that's the person they're going to go after. They're not going after the billionaire. They're not going after even the 100 millionaire. They're going after the guy who barely has $1 million, maybe has $2 million. He has a small business. He has like 10 employees. That's the person that they are talking about when they say the rich. And what it's doing is it's destroying. I think we're in a crisis here. We're almost at a crisis level where it's getting too difficult to operate as a small business. And what that means is all of the concentration of power, because that property and that means of production is equivalent to power. That is the power. That is the hammer and the sickle and the big red fist, right? That's what it is. That's the means of production. And if you have no small businesses, then you got all of your wealth concentrated into the corporations who, by the way, are basically symbiotic with the state, i.e. fascism. So we have a state-corporate merger that has the vast majority of the means of production. That means that the vast majority of people have no means. They have no ability to stand in opposition to the state. So it's not good. What the overall overarching point of this whole thing is, I don't know. I don't care. I just had to get that idea out there. Peter Kropotkin signing out.